Behind every happy face is a story no one knows, and we tell them all. Romantic twists, shocking truths, and unforgettable emotions. Subscribe now, don't miss what happens next. It had been 3 years since my divorce, but the sting of betrayal hadn't dulled. My husband had left me for someone who looked like she'd never known a bad day. 22, fresh out of college and somehow convinced that sleeping with a married man was love. The day he walked out, he didn't even bother to lie. He said he was tired of pretending, as if I had been the one asking him to play a role. I didn't cry that night. I just stood in the kitchen staring at the spot where he used to leave his coffee cup and realized I didn't miss him. I missed the version of myself I was before him. Since then I've kept people at a distance. I created rules. No trust, no expectations, no vulnerability. People disappoint and love is just the bait. The only exception was Lily, my niece, my favorite person in the world. I helped raise her after my sister died. Watching her grow into a smart, kind woman was the only thing that made me feel like I hadn't wasted my life. She visited often, called regularly, and never judged the quiet bitterness I'd built around myself. Then she brought Jason. 24, confident, polite, the kind of attractive that didn't need effort. I hated him instantly. Not because he was rude, he wasn't. Not because he acted entitled, he didn't. But because he reminded me of the man who wrecked me. Young, charming, dangerous in ways only time reveals. At a family dinner, he made a light joke about how I must have been intimidating in my younger years. I snapped at him, said something sharp, too sharp, and watched Lily's face fall. Jason looked confused, even hurt. I knew in that moment I wasn't angry at him. I was angry at the mirror he held up. I saw my ex in his youth, in his tone, and I projected all my pain onto him. Lily left early that night, barely speaking. The silence afterward was heavier than usual. I sat in my living room hating myself for ruining the one relationship I had left that mattered. But I couldn't bring myself to reach out. I didn't want to admit I'd been petty, that a stranger's innocent words could cut deeper than I wanted to admit. What I didn't expect was that Jason would come back, not with Lily but alone. He wanted to talk. He said he owed me an apology. But as I sat there days later, I couldn't help wondering what he really wanted, and why a part of me wasn't entirely afraid to find out. Jason stood at my door with a hesitant smile and an apology ready on his lips. I expected awkwardness, maybe a forced explanation to smooth things over for Lily's sake. But he surprised me. He didn't make excuses. He simply said he was sorry if he had offended me, and that he genuinely hadn't meant any harm. His tone wasn't defensive. It was steady, humble, and too sincere to dismiss. I invited him in without thinking, still unsure why I felt the need to hear more. He sat across from me and started talking about how much Lily meant to him. He wasn't trying to sell himself as perfect. In fact, he admitted he was still figuring life out. He spoke about growing up in a broken home, about trying not to repeat his parents' mistakes. His father left early and his mother never recovered. He talked about watching people fall out of love before they ever understood what love was. There was no bravado in him, no mask, just a young man trying to make sense of his place in the world. I listened, guarded at first, but his vulnerability chipped away at the cynicism I'd grown used to carrying. He wasn't trying to impress me, and maybe that's what made me listen harder. Somewhere in the middle of his story, I realized how long it had been since someone spoke to me like I mattered. Not as a relative, not as a burden, but as a person worth speaking honestly to. I found myself telling him more than I planned. About my ex, the years of feeling invisible in my own home, the humiliation of being replaced so easily. I didn't mean to open up, but it felt like I was speaking to someone who had no reason to lie to me. He didn't look away when I mentioned the affair. He didn't shift uncomfortably. He just nodded quietly, taking in every word. He said softly that people don't cheat because they're unhappy with others. They cheat because they're empty and looking to fill something they don't understand. Caught me off guard how close his words landed. The conversation stretched longer than expected. There were pauses, shared silences that didn't feel forced. I laughed once and it startled both of us. I caught him watching me with a look I couldn't quite interpret. Part admiration, part curiosity. I should have stopped the moment from deepening, but I didn't. I wasn't ready to admit that I didn't want it to end. When he finally stood to leave, he thanked me for listening, said he was glad he came, even if things couldn't be fixed right away. He stepped out the door and left me standing there, heart uncomfortably aware of itself. I told myself it was nothing, a moment of misplaced emotion. But deep down I knew something had shifted and I wasn't sure if I wanted it to shift back. It was 3 days later when Jason came by again. This time with a forgotten scarf Lily had supposedly left behind. I didn't ask if she'd actually sent him. I already knew the answer. I opened the door before he could knock twice. He handed me the scarf with a soft smile, but neither of us mentioned Lily. There was no pretense this time. He asked how I was doing and I answered honestly, something I hadn't done with anyone in years. The conversation moved easily, like we had unfinished business neither of us wanted to define. I offered him tea and he accepted. We talked about old music, about what made us feel alive once and what we'd buried along the way. I told him how the silence in my house used to comfort me, then started to suffocate me. He said silence was only peaceful when someone was willing to break it. I couldn't look away from him. I didn't know when admiration turned into attraction, but it had. He wasn't just a kind young man anymore. He was someone who made me feel seen. There was no moment of decision, it just happened. He reached for my hand. I didn't pull away. The air between us changed. No longer safe, no longer platonic. I saw the hesitation in his eyes, the awareness of every line that could not be uncrossed. And still he leaned in. Our lips met for a brief, stolen second. Soft, uncertain but electric. I pulled back immediately, my breath catching. He froze like waiting for a verdict. I should have sent him away. I should have said it was a mistake. But I didn't. I looked at him and whispered that I didn't know what I was doing. He said neither did he, but he hadn't felt this connected to someone in a long time. That it wasn't about age or roles or guilt. It was about needing something real. My head screamed for restraint, but my heart had other plans. The next kiss wasn't hesitant. It was deliberate, quiet, intense. Everything I'd buried rose up. Desire, fear, need. His hands were gentle, careful, like he knew I was fragile in ways I didn't admit out loud. I wanted to stop, but I didn't. I wanted to escape, but I stayed. It was wrong, undeniably, but it felt honest in a way nothing else had in years. There was no fantasy here, no illusion, just two people trying to forget who they were supposed to be. When it was over, the silence came back, but it wasn't the same. We didn't say much. He held me for a while, and neither of us tried to define what had just happened. It wasn't love. It wasn't a mistake either. It was need, raw, complicated, and unspoken. He left before dawn, quietly, like someone who knew this wasn't a beginning. And I sat there, wide awake, unable to decide whether I felt more alive or ashamed. Morning light crept in, but it didn't warm the room. I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at my reflection in the dark glass of a cold coffee mug. The night before lingered in my mind, not with regret but with weight. Jason was gone. He hadn't said goodbye, hadn't left a note, just silence. Maybe that was easier. Maybe he knew saying anything would make it harder to pretend it never happened. I checked my phone more times than I want to admit. Eventually, a single message came. I'm sorry. I don't regret the moment, but I know it can't happen again. I read it twice, then deleted it without replying. I didn't cry. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt empty. Not from loss, but from the clarity that followed. It wasn't love. I didn't love him and he didn't love me. We were two people who'd met at the intersection of vulnerability and loneliness. The night wasn't about romance. It was about forgetting. Forgetting pain, rejection, time. For him, maybe it was rebellion against expectation. For me, it was a brief return to feeling wanted, to being seen as a woman, not a wound. I couldn't blame him and I didn't. He didn't manipulate me. I walked into it with my eyes open. But that didn't absolve the reality of what I'd done. I had betrayed Lily's trust. I didn't touch her things, didn't text her that day. I didn't have the courage to pretend everything was normal. There are some apologies you can't offer without destroying what you're trying to save. Silence became my choice. I convinced myself it was better that way. For her, for me, for everyone. But underneath the guilt, something else took root. Clarity. I had spent years locked in a cage built from betrayal, shame, and fear. That night shattered it. Not in a way I'd planned or wanted, but it happened. I saw myself outside the role of ex-wife, of the bitter woman everyone avoids at family dinners. I had crossed the line, yes, but for the first time in years, I had also crossed back into my own body, my own skin, and realized I was still capable of feeling. I made a quiet vow not to let it happen again. Not because it was scandalous or wrong, though it was, but because it wasn't what I needed anymore. I didn't need escape. I needed presence to sit with the discomfort and rebuild something honest, even if it started small, even if it started alone. I still don't know what I'll say to Lily when I see her again. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Maybe I'll simply hug her tighter than usual and hope she never finds out. Or maybe one day I'll be honest, not to clear my conscience, but to warn her how easily love can turn and how quickly you can forget yourself just trying to feel again. Either way, I'll carry it. Not with pride, not with shame. Just as a part of who I was when I finally decided to stop hiding.